I didn't make a sound, not one. My son-in-law stood in the middle of my kitchen in the house I'd owned for 23 years, and he looked at me like I was something he'd stepped in, and I just stood there with my hands around a mug of tea that had gone cold 20 minutes ago, and I didn't say a word. That was the moment I decided. Not when he'd started pulling money from the joint account I'd set up with my daughter, not when he'd stopped letting me see my grandchildren on my scheduled Sundays, not even when he'd told my daughter loud enough for me to hear from the hallway that I was a drain on their future. It was that look. That particular look on that Tuesday afternoon in October, standing on my kitchen tiles with his boots still on. Boots he never took off no matter how many times I asked, that finally did it. I want to tell you about the 18 months before that afternoon, because you need to understand how it built. How these things always build quietly in ways you tell yourself you're imagining. My daughter married him 6 years ago. I was happy for her. I mean that genuinely, I was happy. She'd had a hard few years after her first relationship ended, and she came home for almost 8 months, and I watched her find herself again, slowly, the way you watch a plant come back after a hard winter. And then she met him through a colleague at the hospital where she worked as a nurse, and she was so lit up when she talked about him that I kept any hesitations I had tucked away somewhere quiet inside me. He was charming, I'll give him that. He had a way of filling a room, of making you feel like you were the only person he was talking to. At the wedding, he gave a speech that made my sister cry, and she is not a woman who cries easily. He called my daughter his compass. He said she made him want to be better. I believed him, I really did. The first year was fine. They lived in a rental in Mississauga, both working, and things seemed steady. I drove out to see them on the occasional Sunday, and we'd have dinner, and it was normal. Ordinary. Good, even. The cracks started showing in the second year. Small things. He quit his job, his choice, he said, because his boss was unreasonable, and maybe that was true, I don't know. He was to start something of his own, a consulting business. He had contacts, he had ideas, he just needed time and a bit of capital to get it moving. My daughter was still working full shifts, picking up overtime, and I could see the tiredness in her face that had nothing to do with the hours. He asked me once casually over dinner whether I'd ever considered investing in family. He phrased it exactly like that, investing in family, like it was a category on a financial statement. I said something vague and changed the subject, and he smiled and let it go, and I thought, good, done, we won't speak of it again. But it wasn't done. 3 months later, my daughter called me, not him, her, and she asked very carefully whether I would consider co-signing a line of credit, $40,000, for the business. She said they'd pay it back within 2 years, that the business was almost ready to launch, that this was just a bridge. She sounded rehearsed in the way people sound when someone else has written the words for them. I said I needed to think about it. I called my friend Nora. We've known each other since our kids were in elementary school together, and she has never once given me advice I regretted. Nora said, "Don't." She said it simply, without drama. Just don't. She said that when someone asks you to co-sign debt, you are the debt, and I knew she was right. My daughter was on the other end of that phone call waiting for me to say yes. I didn't co-sign. I offered instead to give them $20,000. A gift, not a loan, no paperwork, no obligation. I thought that was generous. I thought it was fair. He did not think it was generous or fair. He never said so to my face. That wasn't his style. What he did instead was get quieter around me, more formal. He stopped calling me by my first name and started saying she when I was standing right there. As in, did she want coffee? As in, is she staying for dinner? It's a small thing. I know it sounds like a small thing. But there is something about being referred to in the third person while you're in the room that hollows you out after a while. The Sunday visits became less frequent. My daughter would text to reschedule, always with a reason that sounded plausible. The kids had activities, they had plans, he wasn't feeling well, and I would say, of course, no problem, we'll find another time. And we would find another time, and it would be fine, and then it would happen again. My grandchildren were 4 and 6 by then. A boy and a girl. I am not going to use their names here because they are children and none of this is their story to carry. But I will tell you that my granddaughter had started drawing pictures of the two of us at my kitchen table and putting them in an envelope to give me when she saw me, because she said that way I'd have them when I was missing her at home. She was 6 years old, and she already understood that our time together was rationed. That nearly broke me. That autumn, things escalated. The consulting business hadn't launched. The money My 20,000, plus whatever else they'd borrowed from somewhere, was gone, and there was nothing to show for it. My daughter told me, very quietly on a phone call while he was out, that he'd been gambling. Online, mostly. Sports betting. She'd found the statements by accident, and when she confronted him, he'd told her it wasn't gambling, it was strategic investing, and that she didn't understand how it worked. I listened to her voice on that phone call, and I heard something I hadn't heard since she was 19 and had just ended her first serious relationship and called me from a payphone in downtown Toronto because her phone had died. That particular quality of trying very hard not to fall apart. I asked her if she wanted to come home. She said she couldn't. I said my door was always open, the same door it had always, and she said she knew. Mum, I know. And we stayed on the line for a while, not saying much. The Sunday visits stopped entirely that winter. I would text and not hear back for days. When I did hear back, it was short, and there was something careful about the phrasing, like she was reading her messages off a script she hadn't written. I started to understand that he was monitoring things more than I'd known. I had no proof of this. I want to be clear that I had no proof. But a mother knows her daughter's voice, and the voice that was texting me was not quite my daughter's voice. I started keeping records. I don't know exactly when I decided to do this. It wasn't a dramatic decision, more of an instinct. I kept a notes file on my phone dated with times, canceled visits, messages that came in odd phrasings. The day my granddaughter's drawing envelope stopped coming. Small things, but I kept them. The house had come up 2 years earlier when they were still renting. The market was brutal. It still is, as anyone living in Ontario can tell you, and they couldn't afford a down payment, and he had approached me about it with a proposal that I had, I'll admit, considered more seriously than I should have. The idea was that I would purchase a property and they would live in it and pay me rent, and at some point we'd formalize it as a transfer, a gift toward a purchase. My financial advisor told me to be very careful. She said, if you want to help in a way you can control. Don't put yourself in a position where you're dependent on their goodwill to get your money back. I listened to my financial advisor. I did not buy the property. Instead, I helped them with the down payment, $60,000, drawn from my RRSP, and yes, I took the tax hit because she was my daughter and they needed a start. The house was in both their names. I made sure of that. I was not on the title. It was a gift, freely given. He seemed satisfied with this. For a while. The October afternoon I told you about happened like this. I had driven out for a previously confirmed visit. My daughter had texted that morning to confirm. I arrived to find her car not in the driveway, and when I knocked, he answered. He told me she'd had to go in for a shift, an emergency at the hospital. Someone called in sick. He said it like he was reporting the weather. I said I'd wait, if that was all right, because I'd brought things for the children's lunches. He let me in without saying anything, and that was when I walked into my own kitchen, the kitchen I'd helped them furnish, the kitchen that had the same brand of kettle I had at home because we'd bought them together, and I started putting things away, and he stood there watching me. And then he said, you know, she'd be doing better without you constantly around. I turned to look at him. He said, you make her feel guilty about us, about the choices she makes. You've been doing it for years, and she won't tell you because she's too kind, but I'm not. I held my tea mug. I looked at him, and I thought very clearly, there it is, finally. There it is, I said, I see. He said more things after that. I'm not going to repeat all of them. Some of them were about money, about how I held money over them, about how my help was really control, about how they would be better off if I just stayed away. He said I had poisoned my daughter's thinking. He said I had no idea what I'd put her through over the years. I stood there and I let him finish. I set the mug down on the counter carefully. I picked up my bag. I said, thank you for telling me how you feel, and I left. I sat in my car in their driveway for a few minutes. I didn't cry. I wasn't angry, exactly. I was something else, something quieter than anger. I thought about that $60,000. I thought about my daughter's voice on the phone in the winter. I thought about the envelope of drawings that had stopped coming. And I thought about the one thing I had never shown him, the one card I had never put on the table because I'd hoped I would never need to. The house, not their house, my house. I had rewritten my will 2 years earlier, after a health scare that turned out to be nothing but reminded me to put my affairs in order. My estate lawyer, a woman I'd been referred to by Nora's husband, sharp as anything, had walked me through everything, and one of the things she had walked me through was this. The $60,000 I had given toward the down payment had been documented. Not as a loan, but as an advancement on inheritance. That language mattered. It was in my will. It meant that when the estate was eventually settled, that $60,000 would be counted against whatever my daughter received from me. It also meant, and this was the part I had never mentioned to anyone, that my will contained specific language about the distribution of my assets, language that could be adjusted, language that was entirely at my discretion. I called my estate lawyer from the car. I told her what had happened. She listened. She said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to change it. Not out of spite, because I need to protect myself and I need to protect her." She said she could see me on Thursday. I went on Thursday. I brought my notes file, all those dated entries, all those canceled Sundays. The time lawyer read through it on her screen while I sat across from her in her office on King Street with a coffee I wasn't drinking. She said the documentation was helpful. She said we had options. We spent 2 hours going through them. What I changed was this. The $60,000 was no longer documented as an advancement on inheritance. It was reclassified with proper legal backing and my daughter's knowledge. Yes, I told my daughter, we'll get to that, as a formal loan with a repayment structure registered as a lien against the property. This meant that if the property were ever sold, I would be repaid first before any equity was split. My lawyer filed the paperwork with the appropriate registry. It was all legal, all above board. And none of it required his signature because the loan was to both of them, and my daughter, once I told her what I was doing and why, signed the acknowledgement herself. That conversation with my daughter was the hardest one. I called her on a morning when I knew he was at the gym. She'd mentioned his schedule once, and I'd remembered it. I told her what he had said to me in the kitchen. I didn't dramatize it. I just told her the words plainly, and I said, "I love you, and I am not going to let this continue the way it has been, and I need you to hear me." She was quiet for a very long time. Then she cried, real crying, not the controlled, careful kind I'd been hearing for months. And she told me things I won't repeat here because they're hers to carry, not mine to tell. But I will tell you that what she said confirmed everything my notes file had been quietly documenting for 18 months. I told her about the lien. I told her it wasn't about the money. I told her it was about making sure that if she ever decided she needed to leave, she would not walk out of that marriage with nothing, that she would have options, that I had made sure of it. She said, "Mum, why didn't you tell me sooner?" I said, "Because you needed to come to it yourself, and you have." She moved back home with the children in November, not because I pushed her. I want to be very clear about that. She made that decision. Her name was on the house too, and they agreed through their separation that it would be listed and sold, and the equity would be split according to the legal agreements already in place. The lien was honored. I was repaid in full. He did not know about the lien until the real estate lawyer informed him during the sale process. I am told his reaction was considerable. I was not there for it. I was at home with my grandchildren, making grilled cheese sandwiches for lunch, and my granddaughter was drawing a picture at the kitchen table, and my grandson was telling me about something that had happened at school, and the kettle was boiling. He got a lawyer. The lawyer looked at the paperwork and told him it was airtight. The house sold in February. After the lien was repaid and the remaining equity was divided, my daughter received her share and used part of it to retain a family lawyer and begin the formal separation process. The rest she put in an account in her own name, her name only. It has been 8 months since she came home. She is sleeping better. I can see it in her face, the particular quality of rest that comes from not having to manage someone else's volatility every hour of every day. The children are adjusting. Children are remarkably resilient when the adults around them are honest with them about what is happening, in age-appropriate ways. My granddaughter has started drawing pictures again. Last week, she gave me an envelope with 4 of them inside. I kept all of them. He has not spoken to me. I do not expect he will. I have thought about whether I feel badly about any of it, the lien, the documentation, the careful, quiet months of preparation, and the honest answer is no. Not because I have no compassion for how painful this has been, but because what I did was protect my daughter in the only way available to me, using the tools I had. I did not do it behind her back. I did not do it out of anger. I did it with a lawyer in an office on a Thursday afternoon, with my notes file and a coffee I wasn't drinking, and a clarity I have not felt in years. The thing about quiet decisions is that they carry more weight than loud ones. Anyone can slam a door. Anyone can issue an ultimatum in a kitchen with their boots on. That is easy. What is harder, what takes everything you have, is to sit in your car in a driveway, set the anger aside, and think, what is actually within my power, and what do I do with it? I went home that October afternoon and I made soup. Tomato from scratch, the kind that takes 2 hours and fills the whole house with something warm. I set the table for one and I ate it slowly. And then I called Nora and told her everything. She said, exactly as I knew she would, well, what do we do now? We do the thing that protects the people we love. Even when it's quiet, even when no one sees it happening, even when it takes months and a lien registered with the land registry office and a daughter finally ready to hear what you've known for a long time. You do it anyway, quietly, carefully, and without apology. That is what mothers do.